So I grew up in the rural English countryside. A bus was really a very rare sight, and the nearest town was 10 miles away. And so if you wanted to go anywhere, you had to have a car. Like a car was a non-negotiable. This was just the way it was. And I remember one time, I must have been about 15 or 16, and I was stuck at some party in the middle of nowhere. And I had to call my parents the next day to come and get me. And so my friends and I, we got our driving licenses at the earliest opportunity because it just meant that we could stop relying on our parents and other people to drive us around all over the place. It really meant autonomy, and I could get myself to wherever I wanted to go without having to rely on other people, without having to ask for a lift. And so in many ways, it really felt like growing up, like finally having some control over my own life. It was never really about the cars. Like cars were never really something that interested me. But it was about what they represented. It was about the freedom, the independence, being able to move through the world on my own terms. But when I look around today, that urgency is gone. Fewer young people are driving than ever before, and even fewer really seem to care. And I'll get into the numbers and the figures in just a minute. But what happened and why? So for my generation, I'm a millennial, just. A car symbolized escape, freedom, autonomy, adventure, even power. It was the bridge between childhood and adulthood, kind of like a rite of passage. But something's shifted, and all of these positive connotations have been replaced with something more akin to a burden. The costs are part of it, of course, like insurance for young drivers is astronomical. Fuel prices are volatile, maintenance adds up, and if you live in a city, good luck finding affordable parking. For a 22-year-old juggling rent, groceries, and student debt, a car is really actually the opposite of freedom and autonomy because you have to go into debt to afford it. And so it's yet another financial anchor. But it's not really just about money. The deeper shift is cultural. So for a lot of Gen Z and younger millennials, owning a car isn't tied up in identity the way it once was. There's no status boost and no rite of passage. In fact, if you live in a city, not having a car can feel more practical, more intentional, even more ethical, like you just take the train or you hop on a bike, or you share rides when you really need it. It's cleaner, it's cheaper, and it's in many ways a lot easier. And the big tech platforms have reshaped expectations around mobility with everything delivered to your door and everyone reachable via phone. The car's role as the connector has really weakened. So you don't need a car to meet people, to date people, to work, or to shop. So the utility, the actual practical use of the car has weakened as well as the emotional draw of it. We used to dream of cars, and now we dream of flexibility, of location independence, a life that doesn't tie you to one place or one payment plan. And that's a very different kind of freedom. And the data does reflect this shift. So in the UK, the number of young people aged 17 to 24 holding a driving license has dropped from 48% in 1992 to just 36% in recent years. In the US, 16 to 24-year-olds are driving 25% fewer miles than they did 2 decades ago. And German data shows a similar trend with driving license uptake among under 25s steadily declining, especially in urban areas. So this is all part of a long, slow cultural change. And it might seem a bit strange that I'm talking about cars and driving, but the underlying reasons for this shift are basically the same as what is causing everything else that I talk about on this channel. So as I said, part of it is economic. In Britain, the average cost of running a car now exceeds £3,500 per year. So when you include fuel and tax and maintenance and insurance, in the US, estimates of annual vehicle ownership are around $12,000. And so that's actually more than some people's rent. So even if young people really wanted to drive, the economic reality is that many just can't afford to. But another part of the equation is structural. The whole model is shifting. Car ownership is less common because we now have car subscription services who offer monthly access without long-term commitment. Or you can just rent a car for a couple of hours if you really need it. There are ride-hailing apps like Uber and Bolt and FreeNow, which have just made it very easy to rent mobility on demand. And in many cities, especially in Europe, Scooters and e-bikes and public transport, they are actually not the alternative. They are now the default. So the rapid development of technology also plays a pivotal role in this. Electric vehicles are changing the infrastructure. Self-driving cars are reshaping the concept of ownership altogether. So you have many car brands like Ford and Volvo. They are investing in vehicle as a service model. So where you don't own the car, you just subscribe to it like Netflix. So some automakers also now have, you can maybe own the car, but you have in-car subscriptions for features like heated seats or cruise control. And so the very notion of what it means to own a vehicle is fragmenting. So I suppose a question you could ask is the youth rejecting car ownership, or is the change in the industry and the economic conditions just making it much less appealing? Well, there is also another important factor that may be larger than either the economic concerns or the technology development, and that is the environmental concerns. In many European cities, the decline in car ownership is structural. It's really heavily linked to urban design and planning. So the basic reality is that many cities are actually just making it harder and harder to own a car. You've got low emission zones, congestion charges, car-free city centers, parking scarcity, rising fuel costs. And in cities like Berlin, Paris, Amsterdam, and London, these policies, they're not really just about climate goals or net zero. They're really also about reclaiming space and recalibrating priorities. And I think that's something that really resonates with the younger generation. So even in smaller towns, the trend is there. The post-pandemic boom in bike lanes and pedestrian areas, this really reflects a deeper shift towards a different kind of urban experience, one that is less centered around the car and more around public life, around shared space, and around local connection. So this is probably hard to believe for people my age or older who grew up with this idea that the car is as important as a house, and you just can't live without it. And while that may still be true if you live in a rural countryside, for urban dwellers, I think modern developments are just forcing us to rethink this assumption. In Paris, Mayor Anne Hidalgo's 15-minute city model imagines a world where everything you need is within walking distance. In Berlin, entire districts are now being sort of restricting through traffic. In Frankfurt, they are systematically removing parking spaces and really looking to try and pedestrianize certain streets. Oslo removed parking spaces in the city center and they expanded green zones, added cycle lanes, and pop-up pedestrian spaces. These changes are structural and cultural. They signal a redefinition of how we live, move, and inhabit urban space. And so for young people living in cities, the message is really quite clear, and that is that cars are not necessary, and in many ways they are no longer welcome. And so if you've grown up surrounded by bike lanes or public transport, and there's rising ecological awareness, why would you want to saddle yourself with a financial and environmental burden? The city is no longer a place you drive through, it's a place in which you live. Another point of importance is that freedom, or this idea of freedom and autonomy, it's kind of moved online. So there was a time when getting a car meant escape, and the ability to drive was synonymous with freedom, freedom to move, to roam, to define your own path. But for Gen Z and those younger, the frontier isn't physical anymore, it's digital. So for Gen Z and younger millennials, connection, exploration, self-expression, that all now happens primarily online. You don't need a car to access new worlds. You need a screen, a signal, and maybe a decent pair of noise-cancelling headphones. It happens on Discord servers and subreddits and group chats and live streams. They have replaced the town center, the pub, or, the Friday night drive. And so what older generations experience through physical space is now increasingly delivered through digital infrastructure. And the open road has been replaced by the open tap. So I think it's worth mentioning that there's a darker undercurrent here too. Many young people aren't just choosing digital spaces, they're retreating into them because real world independence just feels out of reach. A driver's license isn't a rite of passage if you can't afford the insurance or just don't have a stable income. And the car has become a symbol of another era, a fossilized dream from a time when mobility was material, not metaphysical. And so freedom has migrated from asphalt to algorithm. And I never actually owned a car. Once I left home, I never looked back. I was either living abroad or in cities where a car just didn't make sense. And I haven't driven in years because I didn't need to. And it really is true that a car can become a huge financial burden. And for this generation, the trade-off just doesn't seem worth it. So the world they've inherited is louder, it's faster, it's more uncertain. And in that world, freedom looks very different. It's definitely more digital, it's more collective, it's less about horsepower and more about purpose. That doesn't mean the car is dead, but the idea of the car as a ticket to adulthood or independence or success, that is what's really slipping away. And maybe that's not such a bad thing, because true freedom was never really about owning a car. It was about moving through the world with intention, with eyes open, with roots flexible, and a sense of direction that wasn't just mapped by roads, but by values.